You've got big projects to tackle, but your day gets swallowed up by repetitive tasks and constant inquiries. It's hard to make progress when you're stuck putting out fires. That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. Acting like an extra set of hands, you get your time back for the high-impact projects. Ready to reclaim your time? Visit element451.com/AI team to learn more.
Welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, Community Engagement Lead at Pathify. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology. The Hired Geek Podcast is a proud member of the Enrollify podcast network, a robust collection of shows designed to help higher education professionals like you grow every day. Explore all of our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome back, everyone, to another wonderful episode of the Hired Geek Podcast. We are here with a return guest for Hired Geek Podcast. I mean, we've been around for a long time. I feel like it's going to happen eventually, but not as often as you'd expect. Obviously, there's a lot of cool, interesting people out there to talk to about what they're working on, what they're thinking about. And this conversation, I'm definitely excited about. You know, as somebody who has been a content creator with this show and some other things that I do for a really long time, always happy to just talk shop and like, how are we inspiring like the next generation of content creators, or just trying to take lessons and insights from this whole kind of world and bringing them into higher ed in any kind of shape or form that makes sense to you. Because I think we're going to talk about what all those different permutations might be in our conversation here today. We'll start as we always do. Our guest, Bill, if you want to give a brief overview of your professional background, and then we will get into the rest of our conversation on the creator economy.
Yeah, hi, Dustin. Thanks for having me back. My name is Bill Zimmerman. I'm an assistant teaching professor in the Donald P. Bellisario College of Communications at Penn State. I teach classes like digital PR and PR campaigns. Before becoming a full-time professor in 2017, I worked in Penn State's Office of Strategic Communications. So I worked in higher ed communications, spending my last few years there as a social media manager. And before that, I was a newspaper reporter, worked for almost a decade at a small town newspaper, essentially my hometown newspaper, doing all sorts of things from covering local government to writing feature stories to editing and managing the wire copy. So my career's had some neat twists and turns.
Yeah, I feel like you've had the full spectrum of every definition that quote unquote content creator has ever had. You know, the idea of like journalists, maybe, you know, they'd have to always just come up with these stories and find things, or then social media, certainly just the idea of content for its own sake, you know, just trying to get that out there. But I think we've settled nowadays where I think the idea of something like a creator economy has settled to be like, you know, inclusive of a fair bit of different things. But really, I know for me, I feel so much about community and engagement, which I'm sure is kind of music to anyone in higher ed's ears. You are sort of the expert here of the two of us, certainly. We've kind of written a book on the creator economy and really trying to kind of set that foundation as we hopefully kind of pivot and tinker with higher ed to have it be more inclusive and conducive to preparing the next generation of content creators and everything. But we'll start with kind of a straightforward question. I don't know how long or short of an answer you can give here, but what is the creator economy? And then we'll go from there examining how it intersects with higher ed.
Yeah, sure. And I appreciate you calling me an expert on the topic, but I would hesitate. I think based on it, you know, related to anything in the digital space, right? You have to work really hard to stay on top of what's happening. So I'm trying to wrap my mind around all this as well and create some sort of formal curriculum around teaching this sort of thing in higher ed. I would describe the creator economy as the system of individuals figuring out how to make money, how to monetize their content in a digital space. And there's so many ways that can be done nowadays. It's not easy by any means, but that could be through the ad revenue that platforms like YouTube and TikTok are willing to share with creators. It could be brand deals where brands are paying you or giving you free stuff or giving you discounts in exchange for your content. It could be in, like you said, community building, community engagement, where you've put in the work and have such a dedicated interested audience that they're willing to pay for your content. And that may just be they just want to donate a little bit so you keep going, or they may be willing to pay for premium experiences like exclusive content, or the chance to be in a private Discord group with you, or the chance to Zoom with you occasionally. I find it very exciting. I don't think it's for everyone. There is still a ton of luck and good timing involved, but I'm really drawn to the creativity and the entrepreneurship here. And often in the book, we'll use the words content venture to describe an idea around putting content out there that could one day be monetized.
So certainly a lot of different flavors and that idea of, creators being able to be compensated, monetizing themselves and their communities and different things like that, like kind of is the end goal, a lot of different paths towards that. But the idea of this is a career that I think a lot of young people are pursuing, and even folks of any generation sometimes are like falling into because they make a viral video and they're like, hey, I guess if people are wanting to see and hear more from me or whatever else, they'll at least maybe even do it as a side hustle kind of thing. But I think we'll break this down a little bit further. I'll start with a broader question. Why do you think higher ed leaders should know more about the creator economy?
I think first off, there is a newer generation of student coming in who sees this as a viable career option, and they may have big dreams of doing this full time, or they may just want to figure out how to have this as a side hustle or a way to supplement their incomes or a way to further their viability as a job candidate in the future because they can show that they can create and build something. So I think there's going to be a demand from new students for some sort of curriculum, training, for opportunities around all this stuff. So there's definitely that aspect of it. Penn State, this summer, for the second time, we did a summer camp targeting high schoolers called Social Media and Content Creators Summer Camp. And that was run out of our Office of Admissions, along with a camp focused on film and a camp focused on broadcast journalism. So right there, that shows you how this can be seen as a potential pipeline to getting students interested in your school. But then there's the other half of this of how content creators can be another option for colleges and universities that are trying to reach out to their audiences. And that could be as literal as hiring student content creators to make stuff for your university, or it could be borrowing some of those strategies from the creator economy and applying them directly from your brand. I think we've already seen a lot of this happening where schools are on TikTok and they're making a student the face of that account. It's long been a strategy to have your university president making content of some sort, whether that's video or having them write blogs directly to their audience. So they going to be increased demand among new students to have some sort of training in this space. And I don't think that's yet at the point where that's a full-time major. Maybe that's a minor or certificate program, or just infusing content creator lessons into courses that already exist around marketing, advertising, and journalism. And then the second half of this is looking to why these strategies are effective and incorporating them in your school's strategy for reaching your different stakeholders.
The big tagline here, I think, just relevance and the idea that there's a lot of permutations around whether it's recruiting students or engaging them and helping to teach them like the skill sets and everything, whether it's career that they earnestly want to focus in on of being an influencer, or I think a lot of these are skills and strategies that are helpful for whatever job you go into. But even that idea of an institution wanting to be relevant, be where their community is and engage that community, when it's just the idea of we have a variety of stakeholders. Obviously, we have people who work here, parents of students who are alumni, like all these kind of things, just that idea of creating content and taking those best practices, like you're saying. There's so much to learn. There's so much that's changing that you do really have to be cognizant of it and understand how to best deploy it for all those variety of purposes and everything. And I think maybe even a brief follow-up on this, the explosion that's happened with like collegiate esports. I think this kind of conversation makes me think of where there's, I think, a lot of overlap. A lot of content creators do broadcast them playing games, or they'll broadcast like competitions on Twitch and everything. But I just think that idea of institutions just really trying to adapt and stay relevant, and where something like collegiate esports sometimes is the tip of the spear as like a recruitment tool. You can just learn a lot of great skills no matter what you do in the future, or people do want to work in the whole kind of collegiate esports industry. But I think you're just seeing so many examples like this of the broader creator economy, or this really flourishing corner of esports, or something that maybe stands in a little stark contrast to, I guess, the notion that like higher ed might be a little bit of a laggard or something. I guess, just any thoughts in terms of that idea of these different moments like this that seem to be cropping up of like institutions really writing this sort of innovative way of how your sort of purview as well, like that idea, like there is implications for like curriculum here. Like I got a certificate in esports management because I love it so much. It was just sort of a nice way to scratch my kind of academic itch and everything. So to put all this external processing as a question, we're seeing innovation happening in these areas in higher ed right now. I guess, what does it tell you about the culture or the climate or sort of the vibes that you're feeling as somebody who works at an institution that like institutional leaders are trying to really stay relevant in all these different kind of ways?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent comparison. And at Penn State, I know we have an esports organization, but I'm not familiar on how much is actually happening. I know there's been talks about figuring out, can this become essentially like a varsity sport at colleges and universities? And I think what's interesting about it and makes it very similar to this content creator stuff is at first glance, it can really leave you scratching your head, right? That people would want to play video games competitively or that people would want to watch other people play video games. It's not my wheelhouse in looking at this stuff. I try to be very intentional in the textbook of including a lot about Twitch streamers and the way they've been able to build audiences. Because, yeah, on the surface, it could look like you just start playing video games and all of a sudden hundreds of thousands of people are watching you. And there's a lot more strategy that went into that. There was a lot of work on that streamer's personality and figuring out what's the most engaging to their audiences. I think both of these, in a lot of ways, go hand in hand. There's a lot of overlap. There's the phrase putting butts in seats, right? And that is a reality in higher ed, you know? So thinking about this sort of stuff, being innovative about the opportunities you're able to provide for students, although these things may leave a lot of people scratching their head, there's something here. I believe it was in 2019, there was a study that was commissioned by Lego that surveying children and found out how many of them wanted to be YouTubers and even bigger than astronaut. And this led to a lot of hand wringing. At first, that sort of thing is very shocking. But when you start thinking about it a little bit, the chance to build an audience, the chance to pursue a passion, the chance to consistently do something that you find really enjoyable certainly is enticing, right? But there's also a very challenging side to this. There is the luck and timing involved here. There's also a lot of hard work involved. There's a lot of tedious work as far as editing goes, and something you probably know very well, that recording the interviews is a lot of fun, but what comes after sometimes is not so much. I'm trying to find that balance because so much of this is romanticized in a lot of ways. And I'm trying to give students a very clear idea of what the potential chances are. I think at least twice in my textbook, I cited some data from Goldman Sachs that said only 4% of professional content creators make more than $100,000 to keep their expectations at a comfortable height.
And that's a good point. I think that's like the idea of, okay, both of these changes are a sign of the times. It is good examples of higher capacity for reflecting the society that we live in. And the idea of once any of these sort of industries or kind of movements hit a point of kind of critical mass or maturity, that's when you really do have enough of a whole history or kind of context and different facets and things to explore from an academic perspective and maybe research or studies and things like you're mentioning that you can paint a clearer picture of this. It's a little bit more stake. It's a little bit more substance. We're seeing really how this industry is evolving, how it works, what skills are necessary. It's everything from communication skills to technical editing and using all these different tools and platforms to produce everything and to analyze everything. You could end up going too quickly with wherever the wind is blowing if you just kind of hop on things a little too quickly, which I've said this maybe in a couple of recent episodes, but the idea where the VR hype cycle felt like it was quick to kind of burn out. I think we're a little early. Maybe like movies from back in like the 80s that were all like virtual reality is the future and all that. It's just like, nope, not yet. I think when kind of the stars align, when a industry, something like the creator economy has clearly grown exponentially, it is mature enough. There's people who have been doing it for a long time they can really go to as subject matter experts, and there's research and there's books being written. You know, you kind of have all the tools to really earnestly build up a learning experience for students who, they've been watching creators for many years at this point that they may want to emulate or follow, or they're seeing aspects of it that they want to pursue. But with all of this being said, something that I certainly feel with doing this show, like this is certainly a niche. This is never going to be the biggest podcast in the world, but you're really catering to a very specific audience. And I think that is what you're seeing kind of more and more. How have you seen niches becoming more important in the creator economy? And how do you see something like that being relevant for students, for institutions? Because I think obviously you outlined a whole spectrum of institutions can be taking lessons from all this, but this idea of like niches within the creator economy, just talk a little bit more about that concept, because I'd love to hear more of your perspective on it.
Yeah, sure. And the whole niche thing is one of several elements that I'm using to try to ground this. This is essentially the entertainment industry in a lot of ways. And, lots of glitz and glamour, and students are going to have a lot of stars in their eyes looking at this. But I can ground it more by talking about things like niches, talking about strategic planning, talking about this idea that there are the beautiful people out there with the money, the connections, who can amass a big audience in a short amount of time. The rest of us have to work a little harder and find that niche. At first, that may feel like you're limiting yourself. It's actually the best thing because you're zeroing in on what you're most interested in, what could sustain your interest for a long time. And you have a better chance of finding an audience because there's probably some people starved for content related to your niche. And there's an opportunity. You may have a smaller following, but they may be more engaged. And now a lot of the data is showing that brands are having more success working with smaller creators because these people typically, they're often designated as like nano or micro influencers. They often enjoy better engagement rates with their content. So talking about a niche is the foundation here, the beginning. One of your past guests, Jenna Spinelli, who's a partner here at Penn State, she created a one-credit online course a few years ago, which was the first formal piece of curriculum related to this space. And so much of the focus there is on niche, and then also finding something that could sustain your passion and something that also has an audience that's interested, that's looking for something. And in some more of those kind of grounding elements that I'm looking at, it's more boring stuff, but it's the reality. It's talking about the Federal Trade Commission's guidelines around disclosing when you've been paid for an ad. It's talking about the briefs that brands will often exchange with a creator that has the nuts and bolts of that relationship, how much they're going to be paid, what content do they need to return, what key messages need to be included in their captions. And then also talking about measurement as well. How is your work going to be evaluated? Which numbers should you be following? What numbers are the brands going to be paying attention to? The niche is that first step in bringing them down to reality more and getting them to think strategically about this.
Yeah, it definitely is like a great way to frame things, because I think some people do get bummed out when they're not like the biggest creator on planet Earth. They were the lucky one and all that. But it's powerful where like we can help students realize that their unique creative talents and point of view and whatever you're into is valuable. I know I got advice a long time ago, and the genesis of Hired Geeks is like, take two things that you're into and combine them, smash them together. And so like,
I love that.
Consider myself a geeky guy and I love higher ed. Let's put those together and see what happens. Sometimes as people are pursuing their goals, they do just try to follow in the footsteps of someone else. But it's like, well, they already went that way. They already did it and they did it their way. Do it your way. Certainly takes some insights and some lessons. But like the idea is like find your niche. And I think that's really powerful. The lesson here is the idea of an institution differentiating itself and leaning into what makes them unique versus what we've seen. And I think we've kind of gone past the peak of this, but like that every institution wants to be just like Harvard. They want to be like R1 research and like Division I athletics and all these sort of things. I think for certain institutions, really going to get them away from what makes them special, what makes them unique, what people like about them, what they can do really well that no one else can do. So is that your take on this? Is like that idea of a niche for institution is only going to become kind of that much more kind of important as time goes on?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there's so many tools out there, right, for a university to differentiate themselves. And then every university is a niche within a niche, right? When you start looking at different departments and colleges and what they are doing, a place where I think colleges or a strategy from the creator world that I think colleges and universities should embrace is listening to your audience more. Big schools, it's probably not uncommon for there to be a subreddit of people who are going to that school or have went to that school. There are probably Facebook groups of alumni. There are probably nostalgia-focused Facebook groups. And both of those things exist here in State College for Penn State University. And I think in the creator world, the audience has a lot of expectations to help shape that creator's presence, right? They expect their feedback to be heard and often acted upon. So I think that's another piece of this too, to embrace that niche, but also then understand that others are going to have an opinion and input, and it's going to serve you well to actively take that and assess what's worth doing and what's maybe not possible, but at least acknowledging that there's a lot of different entry points where your stakeholders are sharing how they feel about things.
Yeah, institutions need to get a specialized focus. So once students start to find their path and everything and, find their niche.
I would add too, when I worked at Penn State's social media office, I hated that element of social media. I found it totally draining that everybody had an opinion out there just drove me up a wall sometimes. And especially a bigger university with passionate alumni groups and students, it can be really tough. And people are more than ever are freely sharing their opinions through those comments, those kind of other communications channels that aren't owned by the university. I think there's some excellent insights to be drawn from those places.
Well, yeah. And I think you could never, solely have complete centralization. I think with stuff like that, when you're really just trying to do like community engagement or different things like the each individual department and school, college, like they're going to be able to, they know the niche, they can kind of engage that. It's like there's never going to just be like, what's the university XYZ page on this platform and that's it. We can just do all the messaging through there and It's going to get a little bit general and sanitized and not as relevant or whatever. So I think, just understanding the value of niches, I think, is a good lesson to be learned by all here.
If I could add one thing there, and I'd be curious to get your opinion on this. On that point, I think probably a lot of colleges and universities, their first introduction to the power of content creators probably came from YouTube. And those students who were able to go viral doing things like, hey, a day in the life of a so-and-so student, or here is my dorm tour. I think it was a wake-up call to a lot of communications offices where they were like, hey, this student is actively shaping people's perception of our school and doing this totally independent of our channels. And we need to take note of that. And I will just informally quiz my students in my classes and be like, how many of you were partly influenced by a piece of social media content that someone else other than the university put out about your school? And a lot of hands go up.
Yeah, I do think that that's increasingly happening, and that institutions sometimes are trying to like harness that, like they're understanding how important it is, and they'd rather at least kind of maybe put some guardrails up on it or like empower kind of ambassadors and that sort of thing, which obviously you're going to erode a little bit of the effectiveness. I know some brands and stuff try to find that balance where it's like, hey, we're going to send you this thing, give your honest review of it. Like, we're not paying you at all. Like, we just sent you a copy of the book, a copy of the, movie, or we sent you some of this like food to taste and all that. So we just obviously want people to like not feel so much ambiguity around anything. The acknowledgement of institutions of the sort of like peer influence, the power of hearing from somebody who has shared experiences and perspectives and language and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's just seeing that now. There's even just like whole ed tech companies that are trying to like create the platform that'll help all these like prospective students talk about an institution, what it's like there, or build community before they start at the institution, all those sort of things.
Sure. And lots of software trying to harness user-generated content, helping find those photos of your beautiful campus that somebody posted and then creating an easy system to reach out to them and finalize any sort of permissions, giving your university the opportunity to use that. That's something that's content creator light, user-generated content, but it's a very viable strategy now.
So yeah, it definitely reinforces trying to take kind of inspiration from what we're seeing, on certainly any number of platforms nowadays. YouTube's still hanging in there, doing really well. Instagram Reels or TikTok or whatever else. But obviously we've seen changes where something like TikTok has been this very ascendant platform, really changed the game. I guess hard to ever fully predict what might happen in the creator economy. But what do you see on the horizon? I do think that there is like this moment where, with what kind of you're speaking about and doing, that idea of like, how do we build up more literacy? If somebody does want to pursue this, what does that mean? What does that look like? Do you think that we're just going to see more of that? Or is there other stuff that you're willing to make some predictions on?
I think a lot of people are going to increasingly make attempt at it, make a go at making content, whether that's writing or podcasting or doing video. I think more people are feeling okay about putting themselves out there. And that doesn't mean that they're going to be a smash hit, but they're going to give it a shot. I think we're seeing LinkedIn very much embrace all these tools that were popular on YouTube, TikTok, with the chance to do video on there, the chance to go live. I'd encourage anyone who maybe has an outdated opinion of LinkedIn to reconsider and spend some time on there and realize how dynamic it is, because I think that's a fantastic space for higher ed comms teams to be doing work. And I hesitate to make many big predictions, but something I talk about in the book, and something that it's very optimistic, but something I hope maybe happens as more people enter this space, is this idea of a creator middle class. That if, that these platforms have the ability to make tweaks to their algorithms so that more new creators could get discovered, they have ways to open up new monetization processes that could create ways that people could make a decent living through their content. Not get rich, but potentially replace a full-time job, have a comfortable middle-class existence through making content online. And I think that's very interesting to me, of the possibilities there. And there's lots of people who think that could happen with the platforms willing to make a few tweaks to how they do business.
Interesting predictions. I'll let you have the final word here, because I think, predictions aside, obviously always a loaded question. I don't think there's ever been a case of somebody's just like, wait, hold on, go back to episode 260. What Bill said about it didn't come true, whatever. So it's, feel free to just go nuts with your predictions.
I'm seeing lots of creators revisit their predictions at the end of the year and be like, hey, I got that one right. And wow, was I off with this one? And every time that happens, every time a podcaster does that, I find it incredibly endearing.
I don't know if I get too much in that game myself. I do appreciate that is like a good way to just like farm from yourself for content. It's just being like, let me watch like my old episodes of my own show, like that, snake eating its own tail. But it is sometimes really funny where it's just like, oh my God, I was so like cringy when I just started doing it for the first time or whatever. That's even like a learning opportunity, that chance to look back and just be like, okay, like where did I start? Where am I now? Like, how did I grow up? But
I tell students, find your favorite creator and go back and watch their first YouTube video, listen to their first podcast, and you will probably be amazed at how far they came along.
We all have to start somewhere. I think you've given a lot of great perspectives, but what is your sort of final thought, advice you have for higher ed leaders navigating in this new normal?
I think this can be so much bigger than just a few classes on this. And I've been trying to form this idea of a creator. What could a university that is very committed to this? And I think it obviously starts with classes and instruction around this topic, but it could be so much more. At Penn State, we have our economic development arm of the university called Invent Penn State, has started to expand who they see as a founder of a startup, as who they see as somebody with a viable business idea who could get mentoring and money from the university. And in recent years, that has grown to include people with content ventures, which I think is fantastic. So universities could include this as part of the economic development they do in their communities. They could also look for ways from a campus life perspective, new student orgs related to this. There's one called Reach that was started at USC that has now grown and expanded to other universities, including Penn State. Maybe that includes a special living option someday. In the real world, there are creator houses where creators live together because they recognize that they're stronger as a group and can make great content together. Maybe that's something university housing starts to look at. And then there's also the way your university can provide equipment and software that allows students to explore their creativity. The Adobe Creative Cloud is available at a lot of universities. There are so many different angles that a university can look at this. I think that trying to be a creator would be a smart strategy in today's day and age.
Beautiful. I love it. Waxing poetic with predictions there. I think all those would be amazing things. I think with kind of the example I gave before about collegiate esports, like you've seen institutions like reformat or like reutilize spaces that maybe were like, especially like kind of dormant computer labs, and now they're like vibrant esports arenas, and they're like those are the places that students are playing, practicing together, competing in, and that space is their own. So I think not too wild of a prediction though necessarily, but I think it is one of those things where I think if an institution were to say this is something they wanted to fully embrace and differentiate ourselves, like that would certainly set them apart from their peers.
There's also opportunities for students to manage the live broadcast. There are students who could be commentators during those competitions. There's a lot of behind the scenes work involved. It's a whole other side of this that even if you don't want to be in front of the camera, there's a lot of other options and opportunities in the creator economy as well. So esports could provide a lot of opportunities beyond just students who want to play video games competitively.
I'm proud of myself for making a pretty good correlation between esports because I love what's happening there. And I do also love what's happening with the creator economy. And they're interconnected as well. Bright and bold new horizons await us in terms of the creator economy and its impacts on higher ed. So I appreciate you being somebody who is helping us to navigate it all and what ways to connect with you and your work and the description for the episode. But just thanks for coming back to the show and for talking all about this.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. I really appreciate it.
The Hired Geek Podcast is a part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances you like all the other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing constantly, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks all designed to empower you to be a better hired professional. Our shows help you find your next big idea and feature a selection of the industry's best as your host. Learn from people like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Dave Kibbolds, and Eddie Francis, as well as so many other of your favorite leaders in higher education. Enrollify is made possible by the support of Element 451, a leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.